As I was thinking about what to say, I couldn't help but reflect on all of the things going on in our world today. The global pandemic, the economic ramifications of that, the racial tensions that are so strong in our country today, and all of the things that seem to make this such a pretty overwhelming time. Truth is, though, when you've lived a while, there's not many things that happen that you haven't seen some version of before. For the first half of the 20th century, polio was the dread disease that struck fear into the hearts of people, not just in this country, but all over the world, because nobody knew what caused or how the potentially fatal disease was transmitted. But every summer, at the height of polio season, thousands of people would contract it. So in polio season, swimming pools and movie theaters closed, and parents were afraid to let their children go to playgrounds or to birthday parties. Any of this sound familiar to you today? And like COVID-19, there was no vaccine and no herd immunity, and we wondered if we would ever be rid of this scourge. I remember when they finally came up with the vaccine for it, and we celebrated that there was a cure. I remember in 1968, it was a difficult year. Racial tensions seemed to be at an all-time high. Riots erupted all over the country. And Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were both assassinated that year. And we wondered, when we saw the Democratic National Convention in Chicago that looked like a war zone, we wondered if peace would ever be restored to our country. I remember 1987, October the 19th specifically, Black Monday it was called, because the Dow dropped 22 points in a single day, and it sparked a global stock market decline that caused horrific economic damage. A lot of people lost everything they had. We wondered if the financial security would ever be restored. And like most of you, I remember September the 11th of 2001 when terrorists attacked the World Trade Centers. We watched them burn and then collapse, and we wondered if we would ever be safe again in our own country. There's not many things that happen in the world today that haven't happened before, but I don't think there has ever been a time when so many of these things have happened in such rapid succession as right now, virtually all at the same time. But it isn't just the struggle of dealing with global issues that is difficult for us. Sometimes when we experience personal struggles and challenges, it makes all of those other things pale in comparison. When you haven't had a job for months or longer and all your savings are depleted and you don't know what you're going to do next. When your spouse comes and says the marriage is over and walks out. When you see one of your children making some very, very devastating and self-destructive decisions, you don't know what to do. When the diagnosis is that it's going to be terminal. When those things happen, we're not so worried about these large global issues. I was 18 years old when somebody asked me to go and visit a young man in the hospital. His name was Randy, and he had gone swimming in one of the local lakes with some of his friends. He dove into the water and hit his head on something submerged just beneath the surface of the water, breaking his neck, creating severe spinal injuries. They asked me to go see Randy because a year before I had an auto accident and broken my neck in a couple of places and had suffered partial paralysis in my arms and legs, but I'd recovered most of my motor function by then, so they thought I might be able to encourage him because his arms and legs were paralyzed. I don't know that I know what to say to somebody in that situation now, but I know I didn't know then. One of the most difficult challenges, questions for people of faith is how do we hang on to God when it seems like the world is just crumbling around us? What do we do when we're filled with doubt and uncertainty and anger and depression? How do I keep going when things seem hopeless? Well, today we want to think about that for just a minute, and we want to look at the book of Job. It's right in the middle of our Old Testament. Scholars tell us it's probably the oldest book in all of our Bible. It's definitely one of the strangest and most powerful stories that we have in the Word of God. Starts in Job 1 and verse 1. In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. We don't really know much of anything about Uz. We don't even know of the location for sure. We know it was in the east somewhere. When Adam and Eve had to leave the Garden of Eden, they settled east of Eden. And so east of Eden became a symbol of where life was broken in the Bible. Well, life is anything but broken for Job when the book of Job opens. Job has been given a wonderful life by God. He has a wonderful family, tremendous possessions. He's richer than Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. He has an incredibly blessed life. And he's not just the most famous man in the East. He was famous in heaven too. Job was incredibly devout. He loved God. He was devoted to God. He prayed for his children every day. He asked God's protection on them. And he was incredibly good. He never looked on a woman with lust, the Bible says. He was a friend to the fatherless. He was a protector of widows. He was a host to strangers. He was just a great guy, and God was very proud of Job. There was not another man like him. But trouble's coming to Job. Uz is the place where some very bad things happen to a very good man. It's a place where suffering comes without expectation, without explanation, and where it seems God is nowhere to be found. And I think every one of us at some time will spend some time in the land of Uz. Maybe you're there right now. Maybe it's unemployment and financial disaster. Maybe it's health issues. Maybe it's family issues. But whatever it is, that's the land of Uz. Now, the next thing we see in this book, the book of Job, is something that happens not here on earth with Job. It happens up in heaven. And this is a strange story here. God is in heaven, and the angels come before him, and for some reason that I can't figure out, Satan comes with them. And God is bragging on Job. God is talking about how proud he is of Job. And Satan essentially says, well, of course he's good, God. You've given him everything he could ever want. You have bought him off, but you let me get at him. You let me take away all of these blessings you've given him, and we'll see how good he really is. And this is what I really don't understand. God says to Satan, okay, you're on. Go for it. Now, Job has no idea that any of this is going on, and he has no clue what's about to hit him. He's sitting in his penthouse office suite, surveying all that he possesses, looking at his balance sheet, when a messenger comes in. And he says, Mr. Job, I'm afraid I have some horrible news for you. Job 1:14, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and carried them off, and they put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. And Job starts to write off a sizable portion of his assets, but no problem, he's still got a lot. But before he can even make the adjustment to his spreadsheet, another servant comes in and says, oh, Job, there's some bad news. There was this terrible thunderstorm like nothing we've ever seen before. Look at verse 16. The fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. No, now Job has a double catastrophe going on, but he's still a wealthy man. Job still owns 3,000 camels that are in caravans spread all across the Fertile Crescent, bringing goods and products and wealth to his holdings. Before he can even make these adjustments, a third messenger comes in. And he says, Mr. Job, I have some really bad news for you. Verse 17, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and carried them off, and they put the servants to the sword. And I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. And this time, Job doesn't bother starting to make any entries in his ledger. He just pitches the whole thing in the fireplace so it can burn, because there's nothing left to keep track of. It's all gone. Job woke up that morning the wealthiest man on earth, and he went to bed that night absolutely penniless. He had experienced utter financial disaster. Have you lost a bundle lately? Does your nest egg that was looking pretty nice not look nearly as nice as it did 6 months ago? Well, Job gets it. In fact, don't complain to Job. He's lost everything. And then the next wave hits, and this time it gets really personal, because Job had these 10 children that he loved very deeply. He prayed for them every day. He asked God's protection on them. Another messenger comes in before that book even starts to burn in the fireplace. But he's not rushing in to blurt out some news. He's walking in very slowly, and he's not looking up. His head's facing the ground. And he says, oh, Mr. Job, I have some horrific news for you. Verse 18, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they're dead, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. And Job is absolutely stunned. He walks into the next room, and he collapses in a heap on the floor, and with tears streaming down his cheeks, and his voice choked with sobs, Job says, oh God, why did you have to take them all? I know you're good, God. I know you've given me everything I've ever loved, but why did you have to take all of my kids? But I'm still going to praise your name. And in heaven, God looks over at Satan and says, did you see that? Have you ever seen anything like this guy? And then we get to chapter 2, and round 2 of the contest begins. Now Job gets hit with a second wave of suffering as his entire body is covered with these painful sores from the top of his head to the bottoms of his feet. And he's in agony, physically as well as emotionally. He can't stand up, he can't lie down, he can't sit down, he can't do anything to get any relief. The doctors come in and they poke and they prod and they do every study that medical science of the day knows, and they have nothing. They say, Mr. Job, I'm sorry, we just can't help you. This is beyond anything that we've ever seen before. We don't know what to do. We don't know if or when you will ever get better or how we could help you make that happen. And now Job has gone from this idyllic life filled with these amazing blessings to a place where he's crippled with bankruptcy, and then he's crushed with bereavement, and now he's covered with these boils. There's nothing he can do. Job still has one thing left, though. He still has his wife. Any man who has a wife to stand by him and support him and encourage him in his time of trial and struggle has a blessing from God. Well, Job is sitting out on the ash heap where they burn the trash, and he's scraping his sores with some broken pieces of pottery, trying to get relief any way that he can, and his wife comes out to talk to him. Verse 9 of Job 2, his wife said to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. That may be Job's wife's voice, but it's Satan doing the talking. You see, Satan had told God, you let me get at Job and he'll curse you. And he's trying to use Job's wife to do this, to get him to do that. She says, Job, you'd be better off dead. Why don't you just go ahead and curse God and end it all right now? Now, Mrs. Job is a real easy target to pick on, but we're way too hard on her. I mean, stop and think about it. She had lost pretty much everything Job had. She had lost all of her financial security. She had lost all 10 of her children and stood beside their graves as she and Job buried them. And now she is left to care for a horribly sick man for the rest of his life. And then when it ends, she will be left alone and destitute. We might not agree with her advice to Job, but surely we can understand how she feels. Job doesn't fall for that, though. Look at his response in Job 2, verse 10. You're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And God is not cursed by Job. And he holds on to his faith. And in this, the Bible says in this, Job did not sin in what he said. Isn't that amazing? I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone go through horrific tragedies in their life. And they decide that if God's not going to take any better care of them than that, they don't have any use for God, and they turn from God. They reject him. Not Job. When Satan was allowed to do all he could do to Job, when every calamity imaginable could befall him, Job didn't give up on God. He held on to him. I think Job understood what the wise man was saying in Proverbs 3, verse 11, when he said, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline. Do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. When struggles and hardship and difficulties come into our lives, it's not because God doesn't love us, it's because he does. They don't disprove the Father's love. They prove his love for us because he loves you enough to walk with you through the most difficult things in life that will shape you into the image of Jesus Christ. When our daughter was very little, just a little preschooler, she had severe allergies that caused recurring infections, and we were concerned, as were her doctors, that they might create some permanent damage. So they suggested we take her to an allergy specialist to have testing done. We did. And the test that they were going to do involved putting dozens of injections of substances all in her tiny little back. And when she was at the doctor with her mother and found out what they were about to do, hey, preschool kid goes to the doctor and has to get one injection. That's really scary. When she found out what they were going to do, she absolutely freaked out. She jumped off of the examining table. She walked over to her mom's purse, got the car keys out, and marched herself out of that room saying, I'm going to grandmother's house. No amount of reassuring was going to get her to sit still for those tests that day. Well, they rescheduled the test. And the next time they made sure her dad was there too. And it was my job to make sure she was still and okay during the test. And I stood by her, and while she never said a word as they were doing this, I could see the look in her eyes that said, you're my dad. Why are you letting them hurt me like this? You see, what she didn't understand is what we don't understand so many times today. Our Father lets things happen, lets us go through tests and trials because he knows it's the only way we're going to get stronger and healthier. That's what he was doing for Job. C.S. Lewis described it in these words. He said, we want not so much a father in heaven as a grandfather in heaven, whose plan for the universe was such that it might be said at the end of each day, a good time was had by all. How shallow. How foolish to think that a God who truly loves us will never discipline us. That which makes his love authentic is that he does discipline us, and regularly so. Even though Job lived centuries before Paul, I think he understood what Paul was saying in Romans 8:28 when he said, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. He doesn't say all things are good. He said God is going to work through all things for our good. I think maybe the problem is we stop there instead of reading verse 29 as well. Because there, Paul says, for those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son. How do we get conformed to the likeness of God's Son? Well, Hebrews 5:8 gives us a clue. Although he was a son, speaking of Jesus, he learned obedience from what he suffered. You want to grow to be like Christ? Pray that God will be with you through all of those difficult journeys you have to be on. You see, spiritual maturity that comes quick and easy doesn't exist. There's no such thing. If God allows heartaches and struggles in our lives, it's because he cares more about our character than he does our comfort. He loves you and wants to grow you into the image of Jesus because he knows that's the only way you will ever come to know the abundant life that he created you to know. That's what God had in store for Job. He simply used Satan to help accomplish that mission. That's not the end of the story. God is going to use the calamity Job experienced to teach him some truths about himself. And that's round 3 of this heavyweight bout with doubt. At the end of chapter 2, Job's friends come on the scene, and they have some things to say about Job that are not really fair, and they're not all true. And what God intended to do with this experience was to reveal the darkness that was hidden deep within Job's heart that he didn't even know was there. But God knew. So God lets Job get upset. These three friends come and say some very nasty things about him, and he gets upset. You know, when something is upset, it doesn't determine what's inside, it just reveals it. You upset a bottle of honey, honey's going to come out. You upset a bottle of vinegar, vinegar is going to come out. It reveals what's inside. And Job is going to get upset, and it's going to show him and other people what's inside. When Job's friends hear about his troubles, they go out to comfort him. Job 2, verse 13 says, they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. I'm sorry, I've got to pause here for a minute and just say, later on, these guys are going to start talking, and it's not going to go very well. The things they say are not helpful. But the first thing they do is incredible. They sit with Job for 7 days and 7 nights, and they just are there with him. They're just supporting him. I think maybe this is the best example in the entire Bible of people doing what Paul tells us to do in Romans 8, when he says, mourn with those who mourn. That's what they were doing. When we learn about people who are suffering, we often want to help, but sometimes we think, I don't know what to do. Please don't let that stop you from reaching out to them and connecting with them, because they need it. But when you do reach out to them, be careful what you say. Paul didn't say, fix people who mourn. He didn't say, give advice to people who mourn. He didn't say, tell people who mourn they shouldn't be mourning because God's in control and God's going to fix everything. It's all going to be okay. He just says, mourn with people who mourn. Don't tell them if they had enough faith or if they just prayed hard enough, it'd all be okay. And these guys did a beautiful example of that. It's the reason we have connect groups, one of the main reasons we have connect groups, so people can develop relationships with each other so that when these times come, we have someone who will come and be with us like these friends of Job did, because we need that so desperately. Not to come and fix us, not to come and give us advice, just to come and be with us and hurt with us and care for us. Well, back to the story. After 7 days, Job speaks, and what he has to say is not pretty. Job 3, verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He said, may the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said a baby or a boy is born, that day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. Basically, Job is saying, I wish I had never been born. And he spends the rest of the chapter talking about how his life is only filled with suffering. And for the next 28 chapters, off and on, Job pours out a level of bitterness and sorrow and doubt and anger toward God that is absolutely mind-blowing. And he does this in such a raw, honest way that his three pious, God-fearing friends can't take it anymore. And so they start to argue with him. They all say a little different thing, but it all flows out of the same stream. They've all bought into the conventional wisdom of the day. And it's basically oversimplified. It's basically this: whatever you do is going to be in direct proportion to how you're blessed or how you're not. So if you're blessed, you're doing stuff right. And if you're not blessed, if you're suffering something, then you must obviously not be doing what you ought to be doing. So all you need to do is just find out what you're doing wrong, stop doing that, and know what you need to do right and start doing that, and then you'll be blessed again, and everything will be okay. Now, that may be ancient wisdom from thousands of years ago, but it's alive and well today, folks. Lots of people, maybe most people, buy into that philosophy, that prevailing conventional wisdom. It may be called a lot of different things. It's called karma or a bunch of other stuff, but that's kind of the worldview that people have. Well, Job is not buying it. Job understands he hasn't made some radical shift in his morals or his behavior that would take all of these blessings away and cause this calamity to fall on him. So Job reacts. Sometimes he reacts in agony. Job 6, verse 4, the arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshaled against me. Or Job 30, verse 16, now my life ebbs away. Days of suffering grip me. Night pierces my bones. My gnawing pains never rest. He's just in agony. Sometimes he responds in assurance. Job 19:25, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. Sometimes Job responds in anger. Job 13 and verse 4, he says to his friends, you, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. You know, it's hard when difficult times enter our lives. It's difficult to take. But when someone comes along and accuses us of being the problem, we're just getting what we deserved. It's really hard to take when we know that's unjust. It was hard for Job, and he's not alone. He can't understand why God is simply allowing him to suffer all of these things. And so Job says in Job 23 and verse 3, if only I knew where to find him, talking about God, if only I could go to his dwelling, I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Job says, I wish God would show up so I could tell him something. Well, be careful what you wish for. Job 38, verse 1, Job gets his wish. Then the Lord answered Job from the storm. He said, who is this that makes my purpose unclear by saying things that are not true? Be strong like a man. God said, look, Job, these guys are saying untrue things about you. You're doing the same to me. He says, I will ask you questions and you must answer me. Where were you when I made the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off how big it should be? Surely you know. And God continues asking Job question after question after question that Job has no clue how to answer. All he can say is, I don't know. I don't know. Interestingly, God doesn't ever seem to get around to answering the question Job has asked. Why is this happening to me? And I think that's very important. I think it's deliberate. God doesn't tell Job about the conversation with Satan in heaven. God doesn't tell Job any of this stuff. Why? Well, I suspect in part because God wants Job to understand he has a finite mind and can't comprehend some things. He also has a very limited point of view. He doesn't see everything like God does. So there's no way he can understand some of these things. You see, when we read the book of Job and read about Job's life, we start at chapter 1, and we know about what happened in heaven. We see the beginning of it. Job didn't know that. And when we read this, we read all the way to 42, and we read the end of the story. We know Job is going to be so incredibly blessed when it's all over. Job didn't know that either. Job didn't know if or when this horrible situation would ever end. Can you relate to that these days? Because we know the ending of this story, we often fail to grasp the real impact of what it was like for Job to be struggling the way that he was. In the midst of his immense emotional and physical anguish, Job doesn't know how anything's going to turn out. Job doesn't know that he's going to have twice as much wealth as he did before. All he knows is the overwhelming anxiety of losing everything and not knowing what he's going to do. Job doesn't know that God's going to bless him with 10 more children. All he knows is the utter agony of standing by their graves as he buried them all. Job doesn't know that in years to come, he is going to be a bastion of faith for countless generations in the future that will look to him and admire him. All he knows is the callous accusations of these friends of his who are saying all that's happening to him must be because of some horrible secret sin. Job doesn't know that he's going to eventually have a richer, fuller, deeper relationship with God than he ever had before. All he knows right now is that it seems like God is so far away. Job never finds out about these things not because he got left out. It wasn't an oversight. I believe Job never found out. God never told him. Because Job's story is your story and my story today. When God allows trials and sorrows and struggles in our lives, he doesn't tell us why it's happening. And he never tells us how it's going to end. In Job's honest, no-holds-barred wrestling match with faith and doubt, Job teaches us the value of working through our difficulties instead of being dominated by them. We don't have God's eternal perspective in which to view our life's story. So all we're able to see at a given moment is a pandemic that seems like it'll never end, or a marriage that is failing, or kids that are struggling, or a disease that is incurable, or an addiction that is unconquerable, or difficulties we think we can never get past. Job learned that trusting God is more important than understanding God. You see, the intense dialogue that Job had with his friends revealed not just his hurt, but it revealed the chief desire of his heart, which was to have an explanation. When Job is spoken to by God out of the storm, God doesn't answer the questions. He doesn't give Job an explanation. Maybe because he couldn't understand it, maybe because he just wouldn't get it. I don't know. But God knows that understanding why this is happening will not bring Job's children back, and it will not restore his financial security. He'll still have the ache in his heart and the nightmares in his head. And so instead of giving Job answers, God gives Job peace by reminding him that he is in control and that he'll be there with Job and for Job. Finally, in the epilogue, God rewards Job beyond what he could have even imagined. Job 42:10, the Lord made him prosperous again and gave him twice as much as he had before. God took care of Job, and he'll take care of us. Remember Andy, the young man that I was asked to go visit in the hospital? Randy never did recover the full use of his hands, only limited use, and he never walked again. But Randy became an artist through paintings. I have a painting on the wall of my study at home. I think we've got a picture of it here for you to see on the screen. Randy calls this Rock of Ages. Randy became a renowned artist, even with all of his difficulties, his limitations. And today, he has had exhibitions of his work in the White House, U.S. Capitol, Kennedy Center, and in universities and capitals around the world. Randy called this the Rock of Ages because that's the rock he depended on during his storm. In this life, like Job, we may never fully understand why things are happening. But like Job and like Randy, we can trust in the one who is bigger than any heartache that we have and depend on him who loves us more deeply than we can comprehend. Would you pray with me? Father God, we often want to know why, and we struggle so greatly with that. God, please help us to stand on you, our rock, in the midst of every storm, and realize that you will never leave us, but that as we trust in you, you will grow us into the image of Christ and enable us to have the abundant life you created us to have. And may we, like Job, praise you. We pray it in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior, and amen.